Good day, FAnews readers and viewers. Today I am once again talking to Andre from Genasys. Hi Andre, nice to catch up.
Hi Rianet, nice to see you again.
So Gareth Stokes, FAnews editor, recently did an interview with you to do a newsletter, and it was about robo-advice specifically, and part of the conversation was specifically about the broker's concern in the robo-advice space. We've been talking about this for years, but the uncertainty remains. So let's unpack this a little bit. So the reality is that a lot of players in the industry are looking at how technology is changing the marketplace. On the one hand, business processes are being changed by automation, and on the other hand, technology is also changing consumer behavior and expectations and opening up new avenues for insurers to connect and sell directly. What have you seen in this space? And I know you're based in London, but you operate very much in the South African space as well as in the international space. So how fast are we adapting to changing consumer needs locally specifically?
So you're specifically asking the question about how quickly are the South African players adapting to South African consumers?
Yes.
Well, I think the really good news is that I believe that in the South African space, and from what we see globally, and not just here in the UK, but we keep a very close eye on what customers are in the US too, is that South Africa has for a very long time adopted innovative change as well as technological advances a lot quicker than the rest of the world has. It goes without saying that, adversity and scarcity drives innovation. You kind of have to make a plan if you don't have much. And the really big markets like the London markets and the US markets, they've got a lot of capital. They've got a very strong consumer market. So they've never really had these levers pushing on them to drive innovation. So in South Africa, we've always had to try and innovate, find new ways of selling policies. Motor isn't mandatory in South Africa, so we have to convince people to buy it. Then you have to come up with really cool, clever ways of doing it. And the point being is that this stimulates initiative and therefore drives innovation. So I definitely think that South Africa is moving faster than the majority of the world. And the rest of the world should look to South Africa for a lot of this innovation.
That's great. In this changing world of technology, the relationship between insurers and consumers is changing in one way or the other. This is also changing the role of our audience, the middleman, specifically brokers, intermediaries, who in the end will have to disrupt themselves. Once again, we've spoken about this. Will technology replace us? No, it won't. But how do we adapt our role as the broker, the middleman, to accommodate to our new role, and what we have to do?
Yeah. Look, I think it's always a tough question to talk about, robo-advice potentially replacing certain elements of the advisory space, and it's going to happen to a degree. I think the brokers don't necessarily have to disrupt themselves. What they need to do is become more receptive to utilizing technological tools to help them do their jobs in a slightly different way. There's always going to be space for their advisors. A really good example is that airplanes have been flying themselves for many years, but there's always a pilot on board, right? And the thing is that humans buy from humans. Humans inherently have a distrust of technology. We saw it recently as an example. So statistically, if you are driving a Tesla on autopilot, you are at lower risk than driving it yourself. Yet when Tesla has an accident and there was an unfortunate loss of life, they immediately stop the program. We don't stop all cars from driving the moment that a human crashes into another. So I think the biggest thing is for us to start changing our perception about technology and utilizing it. And in the broker space, when you start looking at advice-based bots, conversational user interfaces as an example, dispensing advice, we have seen, in like the medical practices and in the legal practices, how bot-driven device is actually more accurate than human-driven device. But ultimately, it's still a person that should just augment their answer to their customer with some data-driven decision. So as not replacing yourself with a bot, but enhancing your value with the information given from artificial intelligence.
Predictions are that the autonomous tech-backed platforms will eventually remove the human advice. We've just touched on that. And the bottom line is, I wanted to ask the question, but the bottom line is, brokers will not disappear. They have to reinvent themselves. But is there a timeline? Do they do that in their own time? Do they really have to start giving attention to bringing the technology into the business? Or are we talking long term, not in my lifetime?
No. So look, I think that's a really, really good question. And it's quite a complex one if you actually start unpacking it. Because insurance is such a complex industry, and we've got so many different types of insurance that we're selling and the brokers, participate in. We have all the way from the retail broking, the simple placing, which is not just under a threat from artificial intelligence, but it's also under threat from direct insurers. And then we have slightly more complex commercial stuff where, again, you can use artificial intelligence to make better decisions. But more importantly, technology can help you there in managing your customers' risks. So it's, again, it should be seen as a positive, not as a replacement. And then when you get to the really complex types of risks, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. As an example, if you start thinking, a little bit more about, how do you change the types of cover that are complex risk? Maybe it's the Sasol factory out in the Southern Cape. How from construction through to now that risk has changed and the types of cover have changed. I don't think a bot is going to figure that out anytime soon. So to put a timeline on it is probably going to be inaccurate, because on the retail space, it's going to happen very soon. And then obviously it's got a longer tail the more complex it becomes. And then when it gets really, really complicated with some of the deep reinsurance type of placements, it's simply not going to replace anybody in our lifetimes, I don't believe.
Yeah, I agree with you. Do you think that insurers, and that is very directly speaking to bots and to technology, do understand different generations? I know there's a lot of focus on it always to talk about various generations, and maybe specifically the millennials, who have really changed the way they think and changed the way they buy and changed the way they do. Do you think our industry in general understand the millennial and the changing needs and the way that the millennial generation wants to be communicated to?
Yeah, so I think, firstly, I don't think the millennials are changing. They are just how they are. They seem different to us. Well, I still hold this up quite proudly. I still qualify as a millennial, so I'm not that but ultimately I get exactly what you are saying. And yes, there's often this conversation about how do you communicate to the millennials. As an example now, if someone phones me, I kind of go, who's this maniac who's phoning without WhatsApping me first? And 5 years ago, you would just answer your phone and go, hey, how's it going? But ultimately, I think the challenge is that the insurance industry definitely understands the consumer to a degree. I don't think they understand the consumers as well as some of the e-commerce platforms do and some of the big technology players do. But we all know that the new generations, they aren't keen on long-term financial commitments. A lot of them, they will want to communicate to their brokers or to their insurers via WhatsApp. And those technologies exist already. We've implemented it at various places where you can talk to your broker via WhatsApp. They can give you advice via WhatsApp, and people will prefer that. That's an easy solution. I believe where the challenge really comes in is that I think that the core foundation of insurance as we know it today isn't geared to service a subscription-based model like the rest of those consumers' buying behaviors. They all want Netflix. They can turn it on and off on a monthly basis. They want to order food. Boom, they phone Mr. Delivery, and then the food is just there. You don't have to buy all the pots and pans. It's, and that's how people like my good friend Alex at Mr. D, they're disrupting not just the delivery market, they're disrupting the food market by, bringing that in. And again, there's always the very, very easy case of using something like Uber. A millennial can simply just hit a button and get a lift somewhere and never have to own a car. And I think that the challenge is that the way that the insurance industry is structured and how risk pools are shared, that isn't conducive to having subscription or instant gratification, for lack of a better word, type of insurance put in place. And I think that's where the disconnect is. We have to fundamentally rethink how risks are carried for us to fulfill the consumer buying behavior. And I think there's a challenge there at the moment.
Yeah, great. You touched on Uber, and my next question actually relates that to that. Based on your newsletter, one of our readers specifically asked, he said, "What are your thoughts regarding the life industry, and how does technology reshape the landscape? How does the life industry transform or evolve into a customer-centric model? How does or can the industry be disrupted?" And then he specifically said, "Is there something that could Uber our industry?"
Look, if I had that aha moment, like the Uber moment, that idea about what would disrupt the life industry, I would be phoning you from my private plane right now.
Correct.
The really cool thing about, or the challenging thing about the Uber moments is that there's the head of innovation at Vodacom, a chap by the name of Yanni van Zyl. He often says it's the DER moment. Whenever you have these really big step changes in industries like Uber, the Uber moment when they disrupted the transportation industry, it was like, why didn't we think of that? It's a simple, that's such an easy answer. And when that happens in the life industry, it's going to hit us all like a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
But there's two types of disruption and two types of innovation or progression. There's the incremental one. This is the evolution that you refer to, and then there's this big step change. The answer, I don't know what the big step change is going to be, but it's also a little bit different, right? If you think about what Uber actually did, is that Uber didn't come along and disrupt the taxi industry. It didn't disrupt how me and you take taxis. We never took taxis. So the question is that how do we then disrupt a life insurance policy where it's something that protects your life? It's like we aren't disrupting our lives. So the real disruption, I believe, would possibly, a step change disruption, would come from making life insurance redundant. Do we actually need it? Do we even see it? I mean, we all insure our lives to protect our families and make sure that there's protection for them if we are gone. So do we not render it redundant, with, I don't know, wealth pool thing some other way, or some sort of a different type of pool? I think it's going to be beyond just looking at the industry from the inside. You actually have to disrupt it from the outside. But again, in innovation within the life insurance industry, we've seen it. I used to have some really, really cool conversations with my friend Genasys van Pletzen, with the old FIA CEO, about how life insurance looked in the 80s and how it looks now. And there's no doubt that it's better. It is evolving continuously. And we're seeing, again, lots of amazing innovation coming out of the South African space for that. People like Adrian Gore and them at Discovery are doing incredible work that the world is watching them going, what are those chaps in South Africa doing? It's really, really amazing. So yeah, there's going to be disruption on an incremental level, and the big aha moment is going to all hit us, because if we had it, we would be bajillionaires.
Yeah, true. Another question, it's quite nice that we get quite a lot of interaction from our readers, but a very pertinent question was, what is the biggest threat to the future of independent financial advisors and brokers, in your view?
Can I give you a gold, silver, and bronze answer? I don't think there's one single biggest one.
That'll be great.
So number one, I think that this perception that technology is a threat to the brokers rather than the most amazing tool, that mindset, I think, is a really big threat. If we can get people to start adopting the technology and utilizing it for their benefit sooner rather than pushing it to a side, I think that is really, really going to help everybody. And it's also going to delay the other external threats. I think the boring answer is, quite honestly, that, it's the regulators. And I know I'm not going to make any friends by saying that, but honestly, I think that is the biggest threat at the moment, is that the regulators aren't going to be able to keep up with the technology that's coming. Technology is evolving faster than humans are, and it's ultimately humans that set the regulation. So I think that is probably going to be the biggest thing, is this constraint that insurance industry can't keep up with the e-commerce players, they can't keep up with the telecoms players, they can't keep up with banking space, they can't keep up with big tech. And then those people are then going to come and jump in and disrupt it. So we're going to have to figure out, how do we keep up with the technology evolution.
Was that your gold answer? Andre, as always, it's great to chat to you. I think we can go on for hours, but there's another one coming soon. So thank you for your time. And just from FAnews' side, we would just like to wish you all the best for the newcomer that will arrive soon in your family. Enjoy every second of that journey that's going to start very soon for you and Nikita. So that's from our side. And yes, thank you once again for your time.
Thanks, Rianet. I really appreciate it. Yeah, we'll be teaching young junior Symes about InsurTech from day one.
Yes, sure. Good idea.